It was supposed to be a simple drive, a long highway, an empty road, and the night stretching ahead. I had driven this route many times before, but that night was different. That night, I faced something I still cannot explain. It started just past midnight. I was heading home after visiting a friend in another town. The highway was quiet, barely any cars in sight. The moon was half hidden behind thick clouds, and the air was chilly. My car's headlights cut through the darkness, but something about that night felt wrong. I turned on the radio, hoping for some music to break the silence. Static. Every station was just static. That was odd. I had never lost signal on this stretch of road before. I switched it off, feeling a bit uneasy. Maybe I was just tired. Then I saw the first sign. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A figure stood on the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light. A woman. She was in a long white dress, and her hair was dark and tangled. She wasn't waving for help. She wasn't moving. She just stood there, staring on my spine. I slowed down slightly, debating whether to stop. Maybe she needed help? But something deep inside me screamed, "Don't stop, keep driving." I pressed the gas and sped past her. As I did, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was gone. I blinked, my heart racing. There was no way she could have moved that fast. Maybe I imagined her. Maybe I was too tired, and my mind was playing tricks. I shook my head and focused on the road. 15 minutes later, something else went wrong. My headlights flickered. For a brief second, they went out completely. My heart stopped. Then they came back on. I let out a breath. Electrical issue? My car was old, but it had never done that before. I checked my phone. No signal. Not even a single bar. Completely alone on that highway. That's when I saw it. Ahead, maybe 50 feet away, stood the same woman. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me. I had been driving nonstop at high speed, but she was there, standing right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching. My car came to a halt just a few feet from her. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard they hurt. She didn't move. Her face was hidden by her long hair, but I could feel her eyes on me, watching. I hung. Nothing. My breath came in short gasps. I couldn't just sit there. Slowly, I reached for the gear shift to reverse. Then she moved, not like a normal person. It was as if she glided forward. My vision blurred, and for a second, I felt like the world around me was shifting. I slammed the car into reverse and hit the gas. The car jerked backward, tires spinning. I didn't stop until she was out of sight. My heart kept faster this time. I didn't see her again for a while, but my fear only grew stronger. The road stretched ahead endlessly, but something was wrong. I passed the same mile marker 3 times. How? I was driving straight. There were no turns, no exits, but I kept seeing the same sign, the same trees, the same cracked patch of road. I wasn't getting anywhere. I turned the GPS on, hoping it would help. The map was blank, just an empty gray screen. Panic crawled up my throat. Then, the radio turned on by itself. Not static this time. A whisper. A voice so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "Turn back." I swerved, nearly losing control. No, this wasn't real. I was hallucinating. I had to be. But when I looked back at the road, she was there, right in front of me. This time I saw her face. Her skin was gray, stretched too tight over her bones. Her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed endless. Her mouth opened too wide, as if she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then she lunged. But my car didn't move. She reached for the hood. Her fingers were long, too long. They scraped against the metal, making a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I was trapped. I did the only thing I could. I closed my eyes and screamed. When I opened my eyes, everything was gone. The woman, the road. The car wasn't moving. It was parked on the side of the highway. Sunlight streamed through the windshield. Morning. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? I touched the hood of my car. It was ice cold. That didn't make sense. I had been driving all night. The engine should be warm. Then I saw them. Scratches. Long, deep scratches running across the hood. Like fingernails. I never took that highway again. I searched for stories, reports, anything that could explain what happened. I found old legends. Stories of a woman who died on that road years ago. Some said she was killed in an accident. Others said she was murdered. No one knew the truth. But one thing was clear. If you see her, do not stop. And whatever you do, don't let her touch you. Even though I swore never to take that highway again, the nightmare didn't leave me. It followed me. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hollow black pit staring into me. Her stretched, unnatural mouth. The memory of her whisper on the radio haunted my mind. Turn back. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Stress. Exhaustion. Maybe I had dozed off at the wheel and my mind had created some terrifying dream. But then, things started happening. Things I couldn't explain. Outside to head to work. The sun was bright, the air crisp. Everything felt normal until I saw my car. The scratches were back. Not just on the hood this time. They were on the doors, the roof, even the windshield. Deep, jagged marks, like something had dragged its nails across every inch of the car. My stomach dropped. I had taken it to a mechanic just days before. The hood had been repainted, the scratches gone, yet now, it looked even worse than before. I ran my fingers over the grooves. They were fresh. I looked around. My driveway was empty, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been near my car. Then, I saw it. Something white fluttering in the wind, a piece of cloth. It was caught on my car's antenna. A torn scrap of a white dress. That day, I took my car back to the mechanic. I don't understand, I told him. You fixed this, but now it's worse. The mechanic frowned as he inspected the deep grooves. Looks like something was trying to claw its way in. I swallowed hard. Maybe kids playing a prank? I suggested weakly. He shook his head. These scratches are too deep. Not from keys or knives. This is something else. I left the car with him and borrowed a friend's vehicle. I didn't want to drive mine anymore. That night, as I sat in bed, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Static. Then a whisper. Turn back. My hand went numb and I dropped the phone. My pulse pounded in my ears. I grabbed the phone off the floor, my breath shaky. The call had ended, but the screen showed something that sent a chill down my spine. The call had lasted exactly 13 seconds. I barely slept that night. I kept my lights on, every door locked, but even that didn't make me feel safe. At 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The room was freezing. My breath came out in white puffs. My blankets felt damp, heavy, as if weighed down by something unseen. I sat up, shivering. That's when I heard it. A soft, scraping sound. It was coming from my bedroom door. My heart pounded. I reached for my phone, but my fingers trembled too much to hold it. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like nails on wood. I forced myself to stand, creeping toward the door. My hands shook as I reached for the handle. I yanked the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but something caught my eye. A long, dark scratch on the door. 3 lines. Deep, fresh. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and climbed back into bed, pulling the covers over me like a terrified child. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning I called an old friend, David. He was into paranormal stuff, always talking about ghosts and spirits. I never believed in that sort of thing. Until now. When I told him everything, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You need to go back." I felt cold all over. What? No way. I'm never going near that highway again. You have to, he insisted. Spirits like this, they don't just haunt places, they haunt people. She attached herself to you. Running won't help. I swallowed. So what do I do? Find out what she wants. The thought made me sick, but I knew he was right. I couldn't live like this. I had to face her. That night, I drove back. The same highway, the same long dark road. I kept the radio off. No music, no distractions. Midnight came, then 12:30 a.m. Nothing. I passed the spot where I had first seen her. My hands clenched the wheel, my mouth was dry. Then, the car engine sputtered. The headlights flickered. I hit the gas, but the car wouldn't move. Then I heard wind. Turn back. I swallowed my fear and whispered, "Why?" Silence. Then something cold brushed my cheek. I turned and saw her sitting in my passenger seat. Her black hollow eyes bore into mine. Her mouth twitched as if struggling to form words. She raised a skeletal finger, pointing ahead. Not back, ahead. I swallowed, forcing myself to drive forward. The road blurred, twisting, shifting. For a second, it felt like I was moving through another world. Then I saw it. A rusted-out car, half buried in the dirt off the highway. I pulled over, heart pounding. The car was ancient, forgotten. But as I stepped closer, I saw something that made my stomach lurch. A human skeleton in the driver's seat. A woman's skeleton. A white dress, now nothing but tattered rags. I staggered back. She had been here all along. Forgotten, left to rot. This was why she haunted the highway. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to show me. Tears burred my eyes. I'll call the police, I whispered. I'll make sure they know. The air around me shifted. The cold vanished. I turned, but she was gone. The police recovered the body. An old missing persons case. A woman who had disappeared on this highway decades ago. No one had ever found her, until now. After that night, the nightmares stopped. The scratches never appeared again. But sometimes, when I drive late at night, I swear I see a shadow standing by the side of the road, watching, not in anger, but in gratitude. And every time I whisper, "Rest in peace." Months passed after they found the woman's remains. The police identified her as Laura Whitmore, a woman who had gone missing nearly 30 years ago. She had been driving home from a late shift when her car ran off the road. No one had found her until now. The local news covered the story, calling it a tragic accident. But I knew better. She hadn't just been lost. She had been trapped. And for years she had tried to show someone the truth. After the police took her remains, I expected to feel relief. And for the most part, I did. The nightmares stopped. The whispers on the radio were gone. My car no longer bore fresh scratches every morning. But something still felt unfinished. One last thing kept me awake at night. I avoided that highway, but one evening something pulled me back. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done with me yet. I left just before sunset, driving the same familiar road. The air was warm, and the sky burned with deep oranges and reds. For the first time in months, the highway felt normal. No flickering headlights, no whispers on the radio, just the hum of my tires against the pavement. As I neared the place where Laura's car had been found, I slowed down. The roadside was cleared now. Her old rusted car had been towed away. Only a patch of disturbed earth remained. I pulled over and stepped out. The wind was still, the world eerily quiet. I stood there for a while, staring at the empty space. Then in the silence I whispered, "You're free now." The air around me grew warmer. The tension in my chest loosened. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I turned back to my car, ready to leave this nightmare behind forever. That's when I saw it. A single white flower resting on my hood. Not there before, not possible. A final sign, a thank you. With a shaking breath, I picked up the flower and held it tight. Then, without looking back, I got in my car and drove away. This time, when I glanced in my rearview mirror, she wasn't there. And for the first time in a long time, I knew she never would be again. It was late at night when I started driving down the empty highway. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. My car's headlights cut through the night. revealing nothing but asphalt and trees. I had been driving for hours and my eyes were growing heavy. The radio played a soft tune, but it wasn't enough to keep me fully awake. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The highway was strangely deserted. No other cars, no gas stations, no rest stops, just the endless stretch of road. My phone had no signal, and the GPS had stopped working an hour ago. But I wasn't worried. I'd traveled this route before. I knew where I was going, or so I believed. As I continued driving, I noticed something odd. The mile markers weren't changing. It felt like I had been passing the same sign for miles. The number on the sign was always the same, 666. My heart started pounding. Maybe I was imagining things. The air was cold and silent. Too silent. There were no insects buzzing, no wind blowing through the trees, just an unnatural stillness. Then I heard it, a whisper. I turned around quickly, scanning the darkness, but I saw nothing, just my car and the empty highway. As I was about to get back into my car, I saw someone standing in the distance, a shadowy figure by the side of the road, a hitchhiker. They weren't there before. I hesitated. Picking up a stranger in the middle of nowhere wasn't safe, but something about the figure made it impossible for me to ignore them. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they needed help. I got back into my car, started the engine, and slowly drove toward them. As my headlights lit up their face, I felt my breath catch. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, like something from decades ago. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes were hollow, empty. Still, I rolled down my window. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, my voice shaky. She didn't reply. She just nodded and got into the back seat. My stomach twisted. Something about this felt very, very wrong. As I started driving again, the woman sat in complete silence. She didn't even move. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror, but she just stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. After a few minutes, I tried to break the silence. "Where are you heading?" I asked. She turned her head slowly, too slowly to look at me. "Home," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it sent shivers down my spine. "Where is home?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she asked me a question. "Do you believe in ghosts?" My grip on the steering wheel tightened. My mouth felt dry. I don't know," I said honestly. She smiled then, a small, eerie smile. "You should," she said softly. I wanted to drop her off as soon as possible. My hands were sweaty. My heart was racing. The road ahead stretched on, never ending. Then I saw it, the same mile marker, 666. My stopped. I had been driving for at least 20 minutes, but the scenery hadn't changed. The same trees, the same road, the same number. It didn't make sense. I glanced in the mirror again, but my passenger was gone. My blood ran cold. I slammed on the brakes, my breathing ragged. I turned around in my seat, but the back was empty. Then I heard her voice, right next to my ear. "Keep driving," I screamed. The car wouldn't start. My hands trembled as I turned the key, but the engine refused to come to life. Then I saw something in my headlights. A sign. It wasn't a mile marker this time. It was an old rusty sign with words carved into it. "Welcome to the highway of the damned. No one leaves." I turned to open my car door, ready to run, but I couldn't move. My hands were frozen to the steering wheel. My legs wouldn't respond. Then I saw the reflection in my windshield. The hitchhiker. She was sitting in the passenger seat now, staring at me with hollow black eyes. "You're part of the road now," she whispered. And then everything went dark. The next morning, a truck driver passing through found an abandoned car on the side of the highway. The driver was missing. All a note written on the windshield, smeared in something dark. "Mile 666, never stop." I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, I was still in my car, but something was different. The road ahead was pitch black. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, as if the night itself was swallowing the light. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, almost like something was pressing down on me. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Then I noticed something even worse. The car was moving. I wasn't touching the gas pedal. The engine was silent, but I was speeding down the highway. I tried slamming the brakes. Nothing happened. The pedal wouldn't budge. I reached, but it wouldn't open. It was like I was locked inside. Panic clawed at my throat. My breathing became ragged. Then the radio crackled to life. A voice came through, distorted, whispering, "Keep driving." I turned the volume down. The voice only grew louder. "You can't stop. No one stops. No one leaves." The landscape outside started to change. Trees turned into twisted skeletal shapes. Shadows flickered along the road, moving unnaturally. Then I saw them. Figures standing on the roadside, hundreds of them. Their faces were pale, their eyes sunken and lifeless. They didn't move, didn't blink. They just stood there, watching me pass. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to look straight ahead. Then a woman appeared in the middle of the road. I recognized her immediately. The hitchhiker. I swerved to avoid her, but it was too late. My car should have hit her, but instead she walked right through the hood of my car. And then she was gone. The radio crackled again. "Turn around," the voice whispered. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Turn around and go where?" I shouted, my voice shaking. No answer, just silence. I didn't know how long I had been driving. Minutes? Hours? Days? The mile markers kept repeating, 666, over and over again. Then I saw something new, a small dirt road branching off to the right. It wasn't there before. A sign next to it read, "Exit here, last chance." My heart pounded. This had to be a way out. I turned the wheel sharply, forcing my car off the highway and onto the dirt road. The moment my tires left the pavement, the radio screamed with static. The air turned thick, heavy, suffocating. The trees around me twisted, their branches reaching out like fingers. Then, something hit my windshield. A hand, a pale bony hand slammed against the glass, followed by another, and another. Dozens of hands clawing, scraping, leaving bloody smears. Through the gaps between the fingers, I saw her again, the hitchhiker. She was standing in the middle of the road, staring at me with hollow black eyes. "You can't leave," she whispered. The road beneath me began to shake. My tires sank into the dirt as if the ground itself was swallowing my car. I slammed the gas pedal, desperate to move, but the car wouldn't budge. Then the whispers started again. Dozens of voices, hundreds, chanting, whispering, "Stay, stay, stay." My headlights flickered, my vision blurred. The last thing I saw before everything went black, the hitchhiker's face right next to mine, grinning. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the highway. My hands were on the wheel. My car was moving. Mile marker 666 passed by again. I let out a shaky breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The radio crackled, a whisper, "Keep driving." And I did, because now I finally understood. No one leaves the highway, not ever. I had no choice but to keep driving. The road stretched endlessly before me, looping over and over again. No matter how far I went, I always ended up back at mile marker 666. The figures on the roadside never disappeared. They just stood there, watching, waiting. The hitchhiker was gone now, but I knew she was still there, somewhere, watching from the darkness. I lost track of time. I didn't feel hunger, didn't feel tired. My body kept moving, but I wasn't sure if I was even alive anymore. The radio whispered to me, "You belong to the road now." I finally understood the truth. This wasn't just a highway. It was a trap, a place for lost souls, a road with no end, no escape. I wasn't the first to be caught here, and I wouldn't be the last. I stopped fighting. My hands loosened on the wheel. My breathing slowed. The highway had claimed me, and somewhere in the distance, another car was approaching. Another traveler, another victim. I could almost hear the whispering begin again. "Keep driving." It was past midnight when my car broke down on a lonely highway. The road stretched into the darkness, with no other vehicles in sight. The only sound was the wind howling through the trees on both sides of the road. My phone had no signal, and I had no choice but to wait for help. After a few minutes, I saw headlights in the distance. A truck was approaching slowly. I waved my hands, hoping for a ride. The truck stopped a few feet away, its engine growling like a wild animal. The driver didn't step out. Instead, the passenger side door creaked open by itself. A chill ran down my spine. Something felt wrong, but I had no other option. Hesitantly, I got in. The driver wore a hat that covered his face. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles unnaturally pale. "Where you headed?" he asked in a deep, raspy voice. "Nearest gas station," I replied, my voice shaky. The truck moved forward, but the highway felt endless. The darkness outside seemed thicker, almost unnatural. I checked my phone again, still no signal. Then I noticed something strange. The road signs we passed were repeating. First, a sign for mile 66. A few minutes later, the same sign appeared again. Then again. I swallowed hard. "Are we going in circles?" The driver chuckled, but it didn't sound human, more like a low growl. His hands seemed longer now, his fingers stretching over the wheel like claws. I turned my head slowly and gasped. His hat had shifted, revealing a hollow space where his face should be. No eyes, no nose, just darkness. Panic set in. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. My breathing quickened. "You're not going anywhere," the driver whispered. Suddenly, the truck swerved violently. I slammed against the door as the world outside spun into a blur. My vision darkened. When I woke up, I was lying on the side of the road, my car still where I had left it. The truck was gone. But the worst part? My phone had a new message from an unknown number. "See you again soon." I ran to my car, locked the doors, and prayed for sunrise. But deep inside, I knew. The highway wasn't done with me yet. Heart pounding, gripping the steering wheel with sweaty hands. The highway stretched out in front of me, silent and empty. I didn't dare start the engine. I didn't even dare breathe too loudly. The message on my phone still glowed in the darkness. "See you again soon." Who sent it? Or what sent it? I checked my phone again. Suddenly the battery dropped too, even though it was fully charged earlier. The screen flickered, and before it shut off completely, one last message appeared. "Look behind you." My body froze. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. But something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe fear, forced me to do it. Slowly, I twisted my head toward the back seat. It was empty. I exhaled in relief. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I had just imagined everything. I turned back toward the windshield. And there, in the reflection, sitting in the back seat, was the driver. His hollow face grinned at me. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was his whisper. "I told you, you're not going